So for this module, we're going to be learning about the basal ganglia. But before we start, let me just kind of put you in context of what we've learned so far and where we are now. So far, sorry, in this module, we have learned about the hindbrain, which is the medulla, the pons, the cerebellum, and then we have the reticular formation running up right here. Then we went to the midbrain, which is about this area right here. This would be the tegmentum. Up here would be the tectum, the substantia nigra. You didn't have to know where those are, but you needed to know that the superior and inferior colliculi are located in the midbrain. And then we learned about the pineal gland. After that, we came up to the thalamus area right here, and the hypothalamus area, and the pituitary gland, and the olfactory bulbs. So where we are now is we're in the set of structures that's wrapping around this thalamus. Before we go on to the next slide, back to the basal ganglia, let's go over this yellow corpus callosum because it's a nice picture. So the corpus callosum is the network of fibers that cross from right to left that connect the right hemisphere of the brain to the left hemisphere of the brain. We'll be learning more about that in later chapters. So here's the basal ganglia. So I just showed you that we had gone over the thalamus. So this area right here is the thalamus, and these gray-blue structures are, this is supposed to be a three-dimensional picture. So these gray-blue structures right here, what they're doing is they're kind of wrapping around the thalamus. So these are not on the outside. This is an attempt to show you a three-dimensional view. So what these are for is these are for movement patterns. So they're heavily connected to the cerebellum. So I talked to you about like, oh, okay, so when you guys are typing, you don't think about where the letters are anymore. It's kind of a pattern. It's a movement pattern. It's something you don't have to think about anymore. And when you first started to learn to walk, every step was like really conscious, that you had to think about every step and really practice with it. But now you walk without even thinking because it's a movement pattern. When you first started to drive, you had to watch every little detail of your driving, but now it's kind of an unconscious process. So this is the basal ganglia, kind of these unconscious movement patterns. So the main structure of the basal ganglia is the globus pallidus, the caudate nucleus, and the putamen. So I'd like you to remember those names are part of the basal ganglia. You don't have to know where they are, but if you were to read those and I asked you like, hey, where would I find the globus pallidus? I'd like you to know it's not in the limbic system, it's in the basal ganglia. So when I was a kid, we had reality shows too. This was back in the 80s. And we didn't have as many reality shows as now, but we did have some. And a couple of them were real people, and also was That's Incredible. So what you would do is you would watch it, and it would be people doing incredible things. So I remember a long time ago that there was this guy that definitely wasn't a bullfighter, and he got into the ring with a bull, and the bull was charging, and then all of a sudden he had a remote control, and he clicked it, and it made the bull stop dead in its tracks, and it kind of turned around, and it said, "That's incredible." And it was like, wow. But guess what? I found the footage of that. It's not from the That's Incredible show, but I actually found it. It's from a neuroscientist named Jose Delgado, and what he did was he inserted an electrode into the basal ganglia and was able to control the bull's charging pattern. So I want to show you that right now, and then we'll come back and tell you about some other interesting things about this basal ganglia.
In the mid-1960s, a procedure developed by Dr. Jose Delgado took psychosurgery to a whole new level.
I was continually thinking about the brain, about the possibility to do research, about the possibility to go inside, in the depth of the brain.
Rather than cutting things out of the brain, as Walter Freeman had done, Delgado decided the best thing to do was to insert something into the brain. At Yale, Delgado became fascinated by the idea that electrodes implanted in animals' brains could control aggressive behavior. In the summer of 1964, to perform a truly audacious stunt, he chose not a rat nor a mouse, but a bull.
The owner, he said, well, you can do that with cats and monkeys. You can do that with bulls, can you? Well, I don't know. Let's try. Would you allow me to place electrodes in one of your brave bulls? Sure, do that, no problem. But you will not be able to pacify him. I don't know, maybe not. Let's try.
Dr. Delgado really did intend to stop an animal specially bred to be aggressive in its tracks. This footage shows Dr. Delgado in action.
We anesthetized the animal. There we implanted electrodes in the head. Well, next day the bull was normal, and the bull was just going around charging against anybody who could be in the bull ring. It's not completely normal. Then I thought, well, I know a little about bullfighting, so I'm going to test this by myself.
Delgado leapt into the ring with an extremely dangerous animal, armed with nothing but a remote control. He was betting his life that this would work.
The animal was a few feet away. I pushed a button in the radio simulator, and the animal really stopped completely. It was frightening, but it was an experiment. And so, when the experiment was over, the bull was in very good health, and I was in a very good health also. So, no problem.
Jose Delgado was jubilant and saw the success of his experiment as just the beginning.
That took us to another big step. If electrodes implanted in animals are possible, can we implant electrodes in the human brain?
To many people, this vision of brain manipulation was not thrilling. It was downright terrifying.
All right, so I think that was a pretty interesting video. Hope you enjoyed it. Now I'd like to tell you about another study with an animal, and I'm sorry that it hurt the animal a little bit, but you're going to find that that for research methodology with the brain, unfortunately, we've had to look at a lot of brain damage, and a lot of information that we've gotten is from people that have gotten brain damage. I'm going to be telling you the famous story of Phineas Gage in upcoming modules that taught us so much about the brain. So this one is about a cat. So they put an electrode in the cat's basal ganglia, and with the bull, what they did was they just snapped the electrode. They just made it flash. And by making it flash, it caused the bull to stop and kind of turn like what you saw. But with the cat, they turned the current way up, so it actually damaged the basal ganglia. And what happened to this particular cat is it became the Energizer cat, is it could never stop walking. I know it's really traumatic. They did take good care of the cat, but it did take its definite health toll on the cat. But this is showing how that behaviors that we can't stop would be controlled by the basal ganglia. So can you think of any abnormal behavior that humans engage in that you could say, maybe that's the basal ganglia? What do you think? I'll give you a chance to think. Abnormal behavior that you could look at and say, basal ganglia. Okay, I'm going to tell you. Obsessive compulsive behavior. So you see people washing their hands, and they tell you, they say, I know this is wrong. I'm washing the skin off my hands. I can't stop. This is terrible. I can't stop. I have to do this. Or they're checking the lights multiple times, and they know they need to stop, but they can't. It's just like this overwhelming urge to do it. Where we found this activity is in this caudate nucleus. So when you give somebody the obsessive compulsive drug treatment, a lot of times what they're doing is they're working in this caudate nucleus. But here's another really interesting fact about this caudate nucleus. The caudate nucleus is nothing is ever just, when we have abnormal behaviors, it is usually a problem with the brain functioning or the brain chemistry. But that same brain functioning and brain chemistry was designed to help us survive in some way, or is designed to promote our health in some way. It's just gone awry, and that's what happens with mental disorders and brain disorders. And so an interesting fact is this. Did you know that the caudate nucleus is what's active during the first 7 months when you fall head over heels in love? Yeah. So when you first fall in love, for about 7 months, you are actually in an obsessive compulsive zone. They've studied it, and you think about your lover thousands of times a day. This caudate nucleus is lit up, and some of you might have experienced something like this, an intense form of love where you don't want to eat, you don't need to sleep, you have lots and lots of energy. And there you go. Now, after about 7 months, the brain chemistry changes and it goes to more of a romantic form of love where it's not so obsessive, because that wouldn't be healthy for us if all we could do was center on one person. 7 months, that's long enough. After about 7 months, you need to start to do some other things, relax a little bit, get into that zone. So, but here's the question. When can you tell the difference? Is this love or is this lust? So I'm actually not going to say 7 months. You're going to have to give it more time than that. So it's going to take you about 2 years. So I'd really like you to think about this. I know a lot of us fall in love and we say, this is the one, but as your neuroscience professor, I would like to advise you to wait about 2 years. 2 years. So you'll see that at about 2 years, when you think about it, maybe you, maybe your friends, all of a sudden at 2 years, a lot of them who ended up breaking up, right at that mark, they said, you know what? I'm just not feeling the same about you anymore. I'm not quite as excited anymore. The room isn't on fire when you walk in. I'm starting to get a little bit bored. Well, what happens is for the first 7 months, you got that caudate nucleus driving you insane. And then after 7 months, it switches over, and you've got this other kind of romantic love circuit going on by the release of dopamine. But dopamine is the neurotransmitter that works on all addictive drugs. That's the same thing. All addictive drugs are working on the dopamine. They're making that rush. Our highs of life, our like wows of life, are usually from the dopamine. So in about 2 years, we develop a tolerance to dopamine for anything. It's so fascinating. I feel like I'm getting ahead of myself because we're going to go to the neurotransmitters, but pretty much you'll hear this again, but it's okay. You can hear things twice. Is anything that you buy, anything that's new, any new relationship, probably at about 2 years, it's going to start to lose its bliss a little bit. Like, think about it. You got the coolest car ever. And it's so cool. You love riding around in it. But at about the 2 year mark, it'll start being, it's a cool car, but it's just a car. It's still cool, but it's a car. And when you get your new house or your new apartment for the first 2 years, you're like, woo, my new house, my new apartment. And every time you walk in, you get a rush and you're like, oh, yeah. And then after about 2.5 years, maybe, it depends on how much you got to fix it up and so on and so forth. You start to walk in and you're like, yeah, it's nice house. Nice house. I'm happy. But you don't have that same high. So after about 2 years, we start to fade with that dopamine on anything. So unless you can tell me after 2 years, yes, I'm still head over heels in love with this person. They're my best friend in the world. We have so much in common. We can do so much fun. And I'm not sure. I'm not sure. So my professor, my neuroscience professor, he said, well, class, if you expect that romance to last past 2 years, you've just got another thing coming because it's going to fade. You're not going to have it. I was like, wow, so negative, so negative. I hope that doesn't happen to me. But what he was talking about is this dopamine fade thing, and I think it's good for all of us to kind of know about it, to like just respect it. Okay, we're best friends. We got a lot going on. We can still rekindle this dopamine by doing some new things together. But this is just a normal part of everything. Okay, so hopefully you found the basal ganglia pretty interesting. It's the area where Parkinson's disease affects, and so now we're sticking electrodes in humans to try to help the Parkinsonian symptoms. Parkinson's disease is when you get a motor movement disorder, and you'll see that their hands shake uncontrollably, their legs might get stiff. They basically can't control their movement, and so we're trying to get healing for that by working with this basal ganglia. So it's involved in movement patterns, it's involved in Parkinson's disease, it's involved in romantic love, and it's involved in obsessive compulsive behavior.